of the meeting, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 30th of June 2022. Do I have someone to propose them as a correct meeting? Councillor Taylor, and seconded Councillor Rowe. Urgent business, there is no urgent business to bring forward. Division of the agenda, I'm not anticipating the necessity to divide the agenda later on. Declaration of interest, in accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No. So we will move to agenda item number 5, which is the draft statement of accounts and draft annual governance statement. And that is set to be introduced by Councillor Bastow.
Thank you, Chairman. The report recommends that members note the draft statements of accounts and the draft annual governance statement for the financial year ended the 31st of March 2022. The aim of the accounts is to enable members of the public, council members, partners, stakeholders and other interested parties to understand the financial position of the council as at the 31st of March 2022 and how the council has performed against the budget set for 2021-2022 and be assured that the financial position of the council is secure with a degree of resilience. The closing of the accounts is also important to the budgetary process, since it confirms the availability of reserves and balances for future use. The report advises members that an underspend of £214,000 was generated in 21-22, which has been transferred to unearmarked revenue reserves in accordance with normal accounting practice. The 2021-2022 budget was £9.677 million, and therefore the underspend of £214,000 means that the actual spend was 2.2% less than the budget. The main variations to the amount budgeted are shown on page 9 of the accounts, page 21 of the published agenda. Section 3 of the report sets out capital expenditure in 2021-22, which totaled £3.99 million, which included £1.1 million on residual renovation grants, including disabled facilities grants, and just over £1 million on the Batson Harbour depot stroke commercial units, as well as around £0.3 million on the Dartmouth Health and Wellbeing Hub, £0.3 million on St Anne's Chapel Housing Scheme, and £0.4 million on replacement of plant, vehicles and marine infrastructure. Earmarked reserves now stand at £20.84 million, although £4.26 million of this is due to a technical accounting Section 31 relief to do with business rates, which is not funding available to the council to use, so the amount of earmarked reserves is around £16.5 million. Unearmarked reserves total £2.06 million. The level of the reserves are assessed as adequate for the council's operations. Turning now to the annual government statement, which is Appendix B, which confirms that the council has carried out a self-assessment of the extent of which it complies with the 7 core principles of good governance. The accounts are in the process of being audited, and the audited accounts and Grant Thompson's audit report on the accounts will be presented to the Audit and Governance Committee meeting on the 24th of November this year. Grant Thornton will also assess the arrangements the council has in place for improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, financial sustainability and governance. Jackson Murray of Grant Thornton is joining us today on Teams, and Mr. Murray may well be able to give the committee a verbal update of how the audit is progressing so far. Thank you, Chairman and members.
Thank you, Councillor Baston. Shall we go to Mr. Murray now to inform the Audit Committee? Are you happy with that, Mr. Murray?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add then to Councillor Baston's statement?
I think I would just the draft accounts were provided to in accordance with the originally agreed timetable. We've begun our audit work. We've progressed our work, certainly in the areas of risk that appear in our audit plan, which would have been presented to the audit committee earlier in the year. Those relate to valuations around land and buildings, investment properties, pension liabilities, and also journal entries and estimates. So all of those key areas that we flagged through the audit plan are progressing as planned. No significant issues or findings that I would like to alert the committee's attention to at this stage of the audit. So nothing of such significance that I need to bring it to your attention today. As the councillor described, the audit committee scheduled for the 24th of November is where we will bring our audit findings report, which sets out the detailed findings from our work and overall conclusions. Following that, and subject to the work being concluded satisfactorily and no further issues or no issues being identified, I would propose to issue the audit opinion following that, and assuming that the committee does adopt the statement of accounts at that committee. So nothing further from me at the moment, Chair. As I said, nothing of such significance that I would wish to bring it to your attention from the work completed to date.
Thank you, members. Do we have any questions? Councillor Taylor.
I wanted to ask, obviously, the question about St Anne's Chapel, and say well done to the council because that's coming along quite nicely. But where can we see a breakdown of the costs? Because it seems I got concerns about the cost of that.
Mrs. Buckle.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I think that's on page 9 of the agenda, whereby in capital expenditure in 3.2 of the covering report, it talks about the St Anne's Chapel housing scheme. So there was 0.33 million, so 330,000 of expenditure on that scheme in the 21-22 accounts. Now, some of that was where we capitalised previous costs from previous financial years. So because the scheme has progressed to construction, we've gone back and capitalised those professional services costs that were not only in 21-22, but were in previous financial years as well. So in this financial year, you would see it in the capital expenditure. We are also doing a outturn report, which is on the executive agenda for next Thursday, and that lists in detail all of our capital projects and the capital expenditure on those projects. And again, you will see for St Anne's Chapel, that's where you'll see the 330,000. But that does contain where we've capitalised some professional services costs from previous financial years. So the housing, on page 66 of the agenda, that's where it shows our earmark reserves. And for the housing capital reserve, that's actually increased from 194,000 up to 408,000. So whereas we've funded those costs on St Anne's Chapel from the revenue account in previous years, now that that scheme has progressed to construction, we can go back and capitalise those costs. So we have reimbursed the revenue account, the revenue earmark reserve, and that was the revenue funding which we received from government to progress some of these housing projects. So quite a technical adjustment that's happened in this year's accounts in accordance with normal accounting practice, whereby we can capitalise those costs now that the asset's being built.
Yeah, but it's not purely build cost, is it?
Pardon?
It's not purely build cost.
No. The build costs
that's what I was trying to get to. Because
there's build costs which will happen in the 22-23 accounts. So, for example, as of the end of August, there's another 700,000 of construction costs, but that's not in this set of accounts. Okay. That'll be in 22-23.
Lovely job. Thank you very much.
Do any members have any other further questions? No. Well, there is a recommendation before the committee that the Audit Committee note the draft statement of accounts and the draft annual governance statement for the financial year ending 31st of March 22. Can I have someone propose that recommendation? Councillor Rose, and seconded. Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
That's 5 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Unanimous. So we move on to agenda item number 6, which is also to be presented by Councillor Baston.
Thank you, Chairman and members. This report gives us an update on the Council's Treasury position as at the 31st of March 2022. The report covers an economic update for the 2021-22 financial year, an update on the Council's investment and debt portfolio, an update on the South West Mutual Bank, and I don't think they are a bank, although they're South West Mutual is the correct title. A review of the investment and borrowing strategies, the 2021-22 capital expenditure and prudential indicators shown in Appendix B. As at the 31st of March 2022, the Council underperformed against the industry benchmark of 0.07%. The Council achieved a rate of return of 0.07% against the sterling overnight interbank average of 0.14%. This return reflects the fact that investments were kept very short term due to concerns over cash flow, as there were many unknown variables such as the payment of business grants. The Council achieved a total income of £140,071 for investment interest during the year, 62,929 lower than the budget of 203,000. As at the 31st of March 2022, the Council held 56.5 million of investments and had a debt portfolio of £14.4 million. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Baston, any questions for Councillor Baston on that? Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Councillor Baston. It's me again. I don't know if it's the right place, but on the accounts there, I mean, there's so many pages, I might have got it mixed up. But we've got a £63,000 shortfall on income. Now, why have we got that, and where is it lost?
I'll answer it initially. I think it's because we didn't get the return on our investments that we had budgeted for, and I can see Lisa's nodding. So,
is that purely because of interest, or because it is? I mean, because is that enough to cover?
I think.
Are we making a profit on the borrowings? That's
what it was. We were being very cautious about how we invested the money because of the uncertainty of the market. Is there somebody wanting to speak?
Okay, that's fine.
No,
Thank
sorry.
you, Larry.
Right.
Thank you.
Is that right, Lisa?
Mrs. Buckle. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Exactly as Councillor Baston has said, obviously bank base rates at the time in 21-22 were at a historically low rate. That's obviously not the case now. Bank base rates have gone up to 1.75% and are predicted to rise further. Again, on next Thursday's executive agenda, there is a report on the medium-term financial strategy. And within that, I am estimating that we will probably make about £500,000 income on our treasury management investments. So that 140,000 that we achieved in 21-22, in 23-24, I think that'll be about £500,000, and that will purely be because the base rate has increased. It's predicted to increase further. I mean, there is a breakdown on the investment returns on page 169. The CCLA investment has performed very well. Not only has it retained its value, but we've achieved an interest rate on that of 3.25 on the property fund and 2.39 on the income fund. But obviously those are higher risk investments, and we wouldn't recommend to members that we invest more than sort of 3.5 million that we've already got invested with CCLA. I was part of a Devon Section 151 officers meeting yesterday, and we were talking about treasury management investments, and I asked the question, was anybody doing anything different really? And I think the strategy is very much a strategy that we're adopting, in that investing in the money market funds, investing some of our funds in higher risk investments like CCLA, but also keeping a lot of our cash flows short term as well. Thank you, Chair.
Do members of the committee have any further questions regarding this agenda item? Nope. So we're on agenda item number 6, has 2 recommendations for it. I'm going to intend to take both at the same time. The Audit Committee approves the actual 21-22 prudential and treasury indicators in the report and notes the annual treasury management report for 21-22. Do I have someone to propose that? Councillor Taylor, and seconded. Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
That's 5 unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
And so we move on to agenda item number 7, which is to be presented by Councillor Pearce, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. In this report, you're being asked to approve the internal audit charter and strategy, and to note and approve the progress made against the 22-23 internal audit plan. Now, you'll see actually that this year's report has a slightly different look, and the 2 attachments are slightly different too. First, you've got the internal audit charter and strategy. This is presented for agreement, and it is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards for it to be periodically reviewed by Audit and the Governance Committee. In essence, it lays out the responsibilities of internal audit and the Council as related to the internal audit activity. And secondly, the internal audit progress report, which is not so different from usual, but it has been revised to use the standard Devon Audit Partnership format. It's intended to be clearer and provide more focused information. In terms of progress to deliver the plan, this has been impacted by continued allocation of one of the auditors to support grant administration. The Section 151 officer has agreed with the Devon Audit Partnership that they can provide substitute audit cover to make up for the auditor shortfall, which should help resolve the problem and enable progress to be recovered. And I think it's being suggested that this should be a cyber attack audit, which I think in present circumstances would probably be a very good idea. So over to you, Chairman.
Thank you. We're joined by the Audit Manager, Mr Middlemas, here today. Would you like to add anything to the report the Leader of the Council has just made?
No, so just to introduce myself, obviously Paul Middlemas, this is the first time I've attended the committee. So I'm currently the Audit Manager for a number of district councils, so North Devon, Mid Devon, Torridge. I also taking forward large amounts of the Tembridge audit plan. So I think the thinking is that we'll be able to identify and sort of discuss good practice across the different councils, and sort of make that as a priority, as a way of sort of adding value. So in terms of 2 documents, so Councillor Pearce has stated to take the first one, the audit charter and strategy. So that's a fairly standard internal audit requirement, a professional standard that we present our charter and our strategy to you for a review and approval. As you can see, it sort of sets out the purpose and role of internal audit, how we discharge our responsibilities and our professional requirements and so on. And the strategy itself provides more detail on how we undertake our work, and including the annual plan report and our performance and quality assurance measures. So can I just ask questions for that first document? Is there any sort of questions on that, which is, I admit, a fairly dry document, but that's you have to state it as per the standards.
If you'd like to turn your microphone off. Members, do we have any questions for the Audit Manager?
Just on the first document.
Yeah. No questions? No, not on the first document. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the second paper is our progress report. As the Councillor said, that's sort of we've taken an opportunity to revise it into our standard Devon Audit Partnership format. So if we go to page 211, well, that provides the opinion statement, which is at this time is a reasonable, and as you appreciate, we sort of update that as we deliver our audits and become aware of things and so on. So the executive summary on the same page is on the right of the page, and you'll see that we've decided on agreed a substantial assurance for the asset investment strategy, and then reasonable assurances for the creditor and housing benefit reports, and then related to risk audits on development management. So we also went for a reasonable and identify quite a significant improvement to from our audit of 2019 in terms of how Section 106 agreements are managed and monitored and so on. So more detail on each of those is in Appendix 1. On page 212, at the top of the page, there's mention of recommendation tracking. So as part of our audit work, we identify sort of weaknesses and discuss with management the recommendations and actions that they need to take. So obviously one risk is that those actions are not then taken forward. So so in essence, we've identified that the council needs to introduce a system to track and monitor implementation of those recommendations and make sure that they're delivered, or that there's high senior management visibility of whether the recommendations are actually delivered. So we've discussed with the Section 151 officer and others that they need to put something in place, and it's been agreed that they will review the last the recommendations going back to April 2020 with a focus on the high and medium ones, and just confirm that they are implemented or remain outstanding and so on, and then going forward from there, when we've got clarity on those, we'll introduce a system so that all future audit reports are recorded and monitored and so on. The next section talks about delivery of the plan. So we continue to complete the 21-22 plan, but we're almost there. We've since publication of the papers, we've agreed sort of two other audit reports, and so only have two left to finalise. And then regarding audit this year's delivery of the plan. As Councillor said, one of our core auditors has been or continues to undertake COVID-19 business grant support. So again, we're looking at alternative resource. One of those actually involves using One West, which is one of our strategic partners, to undertake cybersecurity and information management audits, which I think is good news. And then just finally a couple of things. So Appendix 1 obviously provides the summary of our audit reports, and Appendix 2 provides the sort of summary details of our plan and where we are on each of them. And you'll note that we put in indicative timescales to deliver the audits, and hopefully that addresses a comment from the last audit committee about can you provide more detail on when these audits are to be undertaken. So, but I might add, these are indicative, so a lot depends on management ability to support them and our resources and so on. So that was a canter through the papers. So is there any questions from anyone?
Councillor Spencer.
Helps if you press the right button. Sorry. Thank you for that. I've got a couple of queries, if I might. And you touched on one of them, and that's on page 212, and that's page 3 of your report, under the heading Audit Coverage. And you talk about 2022-23 and a deficit of bodies, 65 days for that particular year. Can you just expand on how the practical effect of that and how you're going to recover and stay on target, or could you go through that in a little more detail, please? Is that all by One West?
No, so One West are they are doing approximately 30 days work. 30 days. It's actually 35 days work. So that's a big chunk of it. And I might say the 65 days is what's currently been taken by one of yours on business grants. So that might increase that amount of time. So in essence, we in Devon Partnership need to find additional resource, and we do have a variety of sort of resources we can call in to do the work for us who are not currently in the team. So people who have got expertise and so on. So we've got between now and the end of the year to sort of identify people. So not anticipating it to be a problem.
Do you want to put the next question again, Councillor Spencer?
Sorry, that was the next question. Are you fairly confident that you can get back on track, back on target by the year end?
Yes, I think so. Yes, as I said, it's September now, so I think there's enough time to address and get the people in. And I mean, as I said, the question I asked the Section 151 officer was, is the resource available? But she's confirmed that in essence, the work to progress the grants is paid by the government. So it's not as if the money resource from the council is not available to fund the work that we'll provide.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
Sorry, I've got a couple more. Sorry about this. On page 213 of our agenda, page 4 of yours, under creditor payments, you say at the foot of it, and it's in bold, we agreed to high priority recommendations related to procurement, etc. Can you just expand on that and talk to us about those, please?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just trying to find the paper. So they are quite technical in nature. So the first one. Yeah, so procurement of agricultural planning advice. So apparently agricultural planning advice has been provided by the same supplier for some years without any actual procurement being undertaken. It's using the same consultant, and so Southham's incurring about 42k worth of expenditure. So we're just in essence saying that the procurement should be they should be subject to procurement rules, so have competition to make sure that you're getting the best value for money out of the advice and so on. So that's the first high one, and the second high one was about planning notice adverts. So again, this is a very similar one in terms of when you put in planning notice requirements into the media, you should subject them to normal contract procedure rules, so that you put in a contract with a supplier, and then if you can't get the relevant 2 or 3 quotes, you then request an exemption. I'll break through the councillor.
Did you have a question, Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, but I don't want to interrupt you. I was going to wait until you'd finished on this particular point.
All right. So anyway, that's the summary of the 2 high.
Councillor Pearce.
Yeah. On the planning notices, as I understand it, we're obliged in law to advertise in the local, or to put planning applications in the local papers. But we're between a rock and a hard place because we only have one local paper supplier. and fewer people all the time are reading that paper. And it really is an outdated way these days of advertising your planning applications. So in order to comply with the law, we've got to do it, but we can't really negotiate between, well, we can't do a proper procurement because there aren't people to choose from. There's only one supplier.
Yes, and I think that's where the exemption comes through in terms of raising a waiver in terms of you need to diverge from the procurement rules and agreeing a waiver. So that's clarity that that's a reason you can't follow your procurement rules.
Do we have any further questions from members of the committee? No, no further questions. So we're on agenda item number 7. There are 2 recommendations which I'll take as one vote. It's recommended that the internal audit charter and strategy is approved and the progress made against the 22-23 internal audit plan and any key issues arising are noted and approved. Do I have someone? Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Come back. Sorry, I just wanted to come back to it's not to do with the accounts. Mine's a simple one. On 7/19, there's we got a trading company, Cervical Limited, that is Deadwood. I know it's in there to future reviews, but we haven't ever used that. You've got to make a return to Companies House every year. Now, would that not be frugal to get rid of that altogether?
Mrs. Buckle, yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. This is a company that was set up a number of years ago. It's not a company we've ever used. It's a company that has shares, joint shares with West Devon. It's a dormant company. We've never used it. Each year I do have to go onto the Companies House website and file a set of dormant accounts, which does only take sort of 15-20 minutes. But we also have to annually submit an annual return, which again takes a person in our legal team again probably about another half an hour. So in terms of the administrative costs of that company, it's not really costing any significant amount of time. I think when a future housing report comes to the executive or council, I think we probably would recommend that company at the 31st of March 2023 is effectively dissolved, so that we don't have to keep filing dormant accounts on an annual basis. And exactly the same question was raised by West Devon's Audit Committee. Thank you.
Councillor Baston.
Could you not make that as recommendation 3 today, to recommend to council that company is closed down?
Can we add that as a recommendation, Mr. White? Have you captured the wording on it effectively? Yeah? Are there any further questions before we move to the recommendations then? So we have the initial recommendation with part 2 saying the progress made against 22-23 internal audit plan and any key issues arising are noted and approved, and we are adding to that a 3rd recommendation which is being typed up on the screen in front of you now. That the council be recommended to close down the Serverco trading company as well. Mrs. Buckley.
Sorry, Chairman, could we add the words as at 31st of March 2023? Because it would make total sense to do it at a year end. Thank you.
Yeah, so members, we have it closed down the trading company as at 31st March 23. Any further questions? Do I have someone to propose those 3 recommendations? Councillor Taylor, anyone seconded? Councillor Spencer, all those in favour?
That's unanimous for all 3 recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the next agenda item is agenda item number 8, and we move to report from Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Well, members will recall that this was first brought to you in December of last year, at which it was agreed to have a 6-monthly update, and this is really the first available meeting there's been since then. to report back. Now, over the year, there have been a number of incremental changes that have been made in various departments, both in finance, housing, and generally in assets, to respond to the recommendations that were made in the last report, of which there were 11. Now, I don't think I need to go into those in detail because they are all listed quite clearly in the report. I think the assurance I'd like to give you is that whilst you probably haven't noticed these recommendations as they came through as being part of this report should satisfy you that the recommendations that were made in the last report have now been fully complied with, and that I think the council should be reassured that what was not a very good position before has now been tightened up considerably, so that going forward we are in a much better position to assure clarity and proper governance of this area of the council's work.
Do members have any questions on agenda item number 8? Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Reading through the report, I was interested to see in some of the recommendations. So, recommendation 1: clear identification of those officers and members responsible for overseeing the projects and giving authority for the progression of the projects from one stage to the next. And then, when you read the narrative behind that recommendation, I'm struggling to see at what stage do any of the elected members get involved and where they would take up responsibility. It may be that I've overseen it, or I wonder if somebody could give me some advice on that.
I think it's recommendation 8, isn't it, that applies there?
Councillor Pearce?
Yeah.
Could you switch your microphone off, Councillor Brazil?
Sorry.
Otherwise the camera remains on you.
Sorry, if you look at recommendation 8, I think that deals with it, that there should be regular updates to senior leadership team and the lead member. So whilst there may not be detailed reporting back to all the whole council, which I don't think was ever the intention of the recommendation, it should be that the lead member and senior managers of the council are aware of what's going on.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Brazil?
Well, it does to a certain extent. I would still like to see it more explicit within it. And also, I mean, one of the issues that we found, and I think particularly the application that we were looking into in Kingsbridge, is that the local ward members in that particular occasion were only involved at a very late stage. And I don't see again within the recommendations that would solve that particular problem.
Mrs. Buckle, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In terms of Councillor Brazil's first question, on page 223, right at the bottom, I think, of recommendation 1, the last bullet point there, it talks about once the project scope is agreed, feasibility and viability work, including planning, pre-application can commence. And then right at the penultimate paragraph, it says authority for moving projects through key stages will be made through the project programme board, as set out in 1.5, with recommendations then from the housing and assets team. And then at that point, decisions will be referred to the executive and or full council at the appropriate times. So that's the point at which projects would move from the project programme board then through to executive and up to full council. Thank you.
Are you happy with that as an answer, Councillor Brazil?
No, but I'm not going to argue it here. I mean, my main problem here is that elected members are not involved in a lot of these very large strategic decisions, and they should be. Talking about taxpayers' money, we've got examples where we've wasted a lot of it. No one's taken responsibility. No one's put their hand up and said, "Yeah, we've wasted that money." And I think that the public have a right to be able to pin losses, errors, mistakes, whatever, on specific people. because otherwise I'm afraid it just gets lost in the system. And when I read things like that, I mean, if you read the wording in that particular one that Lisa's she's highlighted, decisions will be referred to the executive and/or at the appropriate times. What does referred mean? I mean, does that mean that they'll take a decision, that they can have a vote on that decision at the appropriate? What is the appropriate time? I mean, those are suitably worded things to mean absolutely nothing, actually, in truth. And I think that that's what's happened, that we've allowed projects to slip, go through, and again, no one takes responsibility for it, and we end up wasting a lot of taxpayers' money, and then it's all just said, oh, well, c'est la vie. But it's not really, is it?
Councillor Pearce.
Well, I disagree with that, because I think at the appropriate time, SRT have brought reports to us or to council to proceed to the next stage based on evidence. Now, whatever that evidence is, whether it's financial evidence, viability evidence, planning evidence, or, and in the case I think you are obliquely referring to, which is actually not housing but something else, after a public consultation which indicated the public were in favour of proceeding with the project, the decision has been taken either by the executive or council that the evidence is such that we should proceed to the next stage. Now, it's not our fault that following a pandemic and following the late awakening of some parts of public opinion, that some projects have not been proceeded with, but at the time the earlier decisions were taken to proceed to the next stage, we were not aware of those objections, because had we been, we might not have proceeded to the next stage. Now, I think that's what you're talking about, but I don't think this is directly connected with the housing report that we have here.
Do we have any other questions from councillors regarding this agenda item? No. Well, there is a recommendation before the committee, which is that the Audit Committee notes the contents of this report and the improvements implemented. Do I have someone to propose that recommendation from the committee? Councillor Rose, and seconded Councillor Spencer. All of those in favour?
That's 4 in favour, thank you, Chair.
Any against?
None again.
Any abstentions?
With 1 abstention, thank you, Chair.
So the recommendation is therefore approved. Now, I believe we still have Mr. Murray from Grant Thornton with us. Is that correct? Can we?
That's correct.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Murray. There was actually a question from Councillor Spencer that Councillor Spencer wanted to raise regarding the minutes from the last meeting, and it related to Grant Thornton. So if I can hand over to Councillor Spencer now, perhaps he can just raise that question. And thanks for continuing to join us.
No problem.
Thank you, and apologies for jumping around. This is on page, our page 2, and there was section A talks about a debate that was had about the significant increase in audit fees. I don't know if you have a copy of that in front of you, or shall I read it?
I can see the Adverts, yeah.
You can. So really, members there felt that we deserve some sort of greater explanation to justify what was in effect a 14% increase in fees. Over to you.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think we've spoken about audit fees a number of times and a number of changes that have been made to our responsibilities as external auditors over the last few years, changes to quality expectations, and frankly changes and increases in scope to the level of work that we are required to do. So within our audit plan would have been a breakdown of what the original scale fee set by PSAA, who are the contracting body. So we as Grant Thornton hold a contract with PSAA, and the council also hold a contract with PSAA. Ourselves and the council don't have a direct contract for audit services. So they set a scale fee some 18 months or so before the beginning of the financial year. And then we come along and audit. Clearly, we're now halfway through, or 3/4 of the way through 2022, and we're looking at the 21-22 financial year. There's various breakdowns in terms of those increases which are set out in the audit plan. I don't have that document in front of me at the moment, I'm afraid, Councillor. So what I would propose to do is if I could give a written response back to you after this meeting as well to set that out, which can be circulated to committee members. But ultimately there's changes in quality expectations, changes in scope of our audit, so the auditing standards that we're required to undertake our work to, and other national issues such as, for example, one of them would have been in relation to infrastructure assets, my apologies, which is a national issue that's currently working through government in terms of some form of hopeful resolution on that matter. So that in a summary is where we are. Audit fees, not just in the public sector, but in the commercial sector, in central government, are increasing and continue to do so year on year. Ultimately, it's the cost that it takes for us to complete a compliant and high quality audit.
Councillor Spencer.
I think you'd probably understand that if we wanted to increase council taxes by 14%, we'd have a riot on our hands. So what steps have Grant Thornton take then to mitigate the increases that you're faced with and the extra responsibilities that you're faced with to arrive at this reduced figure of 14%? How has it come down from to that figure?
Mr. Murray?
Yeah, so the cost reflects the cost to us of completing the work. Ultimately, PSAA as the awarding body and the fee setter consider our proposals for fee levels, as they do all of the other audit firms who undertake local audits. They approve or otherwise any proposed fee variations, and every single variation that is proposed is considered by them. So ultimately, we set a fee level that we consider is commensurate with the work that we're required to do. PSAA then also play a role within this to consider whether that fee proposal is appropriate, which gives some further assurance to the council and to members of overall the appropriateness of that fee level.
Councillor Spencer, would you like to come back on that, or you're happy with the answer?
Not happy, but
not happy. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Jackson. When you provide your written answer, could you also give us details, please, of your staffing input, output? Because it strikes me that you are relying on council officers to do increasing amounts of work towards your audit that we never used to have to do, and yet you are charging higher fees. Could you also comment, please, on the international audit regulations that prior to our leaving the common market, we were obliged to comply with, but we probably aren't obliged to comply with any longer? And what are the major audit companies doing about making representations to government to have these lifted? Because a lot of them are entirely inappropriate to local government and waste an awful lot of our time and your time getting figures that we don't really need, either you don't need and we don't need. So it's all a waste of time going around in circles. So could you comment on that as well, please, when you give your written reply?
Mr. Murray?
Yeah, happy to put that in writing rather than respond to that at the moment, if that's applicable.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Mr. Murray on this issue? No, thank you for continuing to attend, Mr. Murray, and continuing to answer the questions on the charges that you are repeatedly asked to defend.
No problem.
So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, and that is to be introduced by Councillor Baston.
Thank you, Chairman. The report today updates the Audit Committee on the performance of our 2 investment properties. One is a ground lease at Lee Mill to Tesco, and the other an M&S store with flats above in Dartmouth. The latter is newer to the portfolio, having been purchased in 2019. There are no lease events, rent arrears or issues to report with either site, and both continue to perform as expected. The ancillary benefit of owning these properties is a gross annual rental income of £652,000, from which an amount is put aside to cover voids and risks, and debt is paid back. They have been valued in accordance with requirements, and whilst details are set out in an exempt appendix, I'm pleased to note the valuation has gone up. There are no recommendations or plans to do anything with properties other than to continue to hold them in our portfolio in accordance with our strategy. Thank you, Chairman.
Do members have any questions on agenda item number 9? Councillor Taylor.
Yes. Is there any chance that the lease with Dartmouth could be extended, because we only got 8 years left, and the only income we got to pay the monies back on that is by the lease. So if it becomes empty after 8-9 years, which is all that's left, I mean, could we extend the lease or not?
One would expect negotiations to be done at that time, or close to the end of the lease, and reviewed at that time. I don't know if Laura would want to add anything to that. But that's what we'd expect to do, is enter into negotiations when the lease comes to close to an end.
Yeah, because
to renew that, and
I would worry that you know, so they suddenly said, well, we don't want to take it on anymore, and then we are.
But the 8 flats are occupied anyway, so it's just the shop area.
That's enough to cover. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any further, Councillor Spencer?
Sorry, I was going to ask a very similar question. In that, just for clarity, Lee Mill is on an exceptionally long lease, and Dartmouth is on a very short lease. Was there any particular reason for that, or is that just the way it's done?
That was the way when we purchased it. That lease was in existence. So we when we purchased. Did you want to add something to that? No, I saw you go like that. But yeah, when we purchased that building, that lease was in existence. That's why it's shorter.
Could you turn your microphone off? Any further questions regarding? Yeah, Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, we talked about our investment strategy. Just remind me, what return are we looking to get from our investments?
Mrs. Buckle.
It's around about 1.5% sort of net yield on our investment properties. That's different to the treasury management investments, whereby, as I say, you know, we think probably in 23-24 we'll get around 2% on those.
Councillor Brazil.
The increase in investment.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that we're looking to invest in properties and expect to make a net return in the region of 1.5%.
Obviously, in addition to that, there is capital appreciation on those properties as well. So the 1.5% is just the net revenue yield. That doesn't take into account capital property growth. That would be in addition to that. And obviously, with the debt that we've taken out for those investments over the 50 years, once that has expired, then the whole of the rental income will be a gross yield for us, because there'll be no debt on those properties or on that specific investment.
Yeah, but I mean, as we've heard, we've got an 8-year lease on this, and we've got to repay the debt over 50 years. So there's quite a lot of uncharted waters in between then and now. I'm just listening to what it is, and with the 8-year lease on it, I mean, I don't think it was a particularly good investment, the Dartmouth. I'm surprised that the valuation's only gone up. Well, it hasn't gone up that much if we're talking about residential properties there. Residential properties, my understanding, has gone up at least 10% in the last year. Are we saying that the value of the retail over residential is so low? The ratio between residential and retail there is so low that it's only that small amount that it goes up by. I think that this is is something that we should definitely looking to divest ourselves of as soon as possible.
Mrs. Buckland.
Chairman, the valuation that is done is what's called a fair value valuation. So that's the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability. So that is a book valuation at a point in time. That can go up, that can go down. Obviously, that's been done by chartered surveyors. They will take several things into account when coming up with that RICS valuation. That lease is in place until the end of 2031. I don't think we have, we don't have any indication that that lease would not continue. And I think it's still a very buoyant property market. As we get nearer to 2031, then that's the point at which the council can look at the opportunities for renewal of that lease. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions on agenda item number 9? So there is a recommendation, which is that the committee note the 31st of March 22 valuation figures for the council's 2 investment properties and that the rental income be received. We're noting the valuation and the rental income being received. Do I have someone to propose that recommendation? Councillor Rose, and seconded by Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
That's 5 unanimous, the recommendation. Thank you, Jack.
It's unanimous. So we move on to agenda item number 10, which is introduced by Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the strategic risk update, which is presented to members. Members will recall that the risk scoring is done by the senior leadership team, and it is entirely within members' remit to recommend that the scores are upped or down according to how we see them. Now, there is one there that I think I would up, if only so that it agrees with the annual accounts, and that's the danger of inadequate staff resource, which has presently been given an amber score of 16. Now, I think the equivalent title in the annual account is business continuity or something like that, but it amounts to the same thing. And it was given a red score in that. So I think there could be some debate as to whether that should be altered, but it's entirely up to your judgment. I'll leave it to you, Chairman.
Do any members of the committee have any questions regarding agenda item number 10? Yeah, Councillor Taylor. Oh, Councillor Spencer.
Picking up on the same point as Councillor Pearce, I didn't know that these ratings were done in the way that she described, but I did write down here that the risk direction is clearly in the wrong direction, and the narrative talks about an update in August 2022. Talking about insufficient staff resource to meet the needs of our residents and communities. And personally, I'm not sure that that's going to go away at all in the short term. And it's not unique to this council. We only have to look at waste or any of the other services that we as individuals use. So it would be difficult for me to make the comment about the direction the risk was going on in, but I'd certainly like to know more about this, how it's been arrived at, and the impact that it's having, and then possibly to determine Councillor Pearce's comments further after that.
Mrs. Hawkes, would you be able to sort of talk about that particular rating?
I can, thank you, Chairman. And it's fair to say the risks are constantly changing. We're reviewing them on a regular basis. And as you rightly say, the risk is in an upward trend. At the moment, the main struggles for recruitment are around, I think it's fair to say, planning, as has been a long-standing area for struggle to recruitment, and our legal services. Those are the 2 main areas at the moment that we're really struggling. Hence why the risk is probably slightly lower than members would expect it to be, because at the moment they're in discrete areas. I think the next update, absolutely, that risk direction would go further, and I think we are starting to now see impacts in other senior roles, and we've been, I think there's a number of reports recently, certainly in the last week, about the struggles of recruitment to local government. So I think we have got plans in place. We are having conversations with recruitment agencies to see what the possibility is in terms of how we can recruit staff into the organisation, and we will be developing an organisational development strategy in the coming months, which will very clearly set out plans for how we intend to promote the councils as an employer of choice. So we will be taking steps. So there are steps in place, which is why the risk probably isn't quite as high as you would expect it to be, but absolutely happy to take members' views into consideration in respect of that risk.
Okay, members. So the reference that we're talking about here is page 247, and the risk is numbered as the second one on page 247, which is inadequate staffing resource. Now, under the summary of strategic risk given to the committee in August 22, what you can see from page 247 is that risk has moved from possible to likely under the risk strategy. And the option the committee has is to move it from the amber area, which is where it sits at the moment. We could potentially make a recommendation that it be moved into one of the red areas, potentially moving it into almost certain instead of likely. So what we would be saying here, if we made that recommendation, we'd be adding to the recommendation that the committee is making. We would be recommending that as far as the summary of strategic risk impact goes, that inadequate staffing resources should be rated not as likely, but as almost certain. Now, that's a decision for the committee in terms of the recommendation. So, Mr. White, I'm not sure how can you capture that in a kind of recommendation that the committee could consider. So we'll be typing the possible recommendation that you may choose to approve, adding it on the screen. So members, this is effectively an alternative proposal that's been put forward from the original recommendation, and that is that the Audit and Governance Committee review the Strategic Risk Register, Appendix A, and make recommendations to Executive on any further action the committee concludes should be considered, notably including that the inadequate staffing resource risk should be revisited with a view to being increased from the current score of 6, or the current score of, I think, likely to almost certain. Yep, I think that's it. The current score of 16, i.e. likely to almost certain. Councillor Spencer.
Sorry, I've only got 2 other comments and then I'll shut up. On page 252, sorry, it's all right to move on, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
On 252, delivery of waste. This one troubles me a great deal because I think probably troubles everyone a great deal because come the 3rd of October, nothing's going to change. And or things will start changing, sorry, but it's going to take, in my totally ill-informed opinion, a long time to get back to some sort of normality, whatever normality means, or some sort of acceptable level of service. And I just wanted some perhaps more professional guidance on this particular one as to whether that risk score is right or not. I don't have enough informed opinion to make that judgment. And I have one other question afterwards.
I think that's Mr. Hawke that's addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. So I think the risk definition, what is the risk, is important here. So actually this risk is now around our ability to transfer the services back to an in-house arrangement. So that project of transferring the services back in-house, I think the risk, you know, assumes that as set out in all of our waste reports, that the service will transfer, you know, without those significant improvements that our residents are expecting. So it's really, this risk is around the ability for us to transfer those services back in-house so that they are back in our control on the 3rd of October, which is why it's rated as 15, because we do have a dedicated project team, a dedicated project manager meeting on a certainly a weekly basis as a whole project team. So that's the risk. It's not that the risk isn't around us being able to deliver the services. It's about transferring them back to us. So that project.
Councillor Spencer?
Yeah, sorry, the heading is delivery of waste and recycling service. So perhaps I've got that wrong. And then it says the most likely cause of this risk occurring would be inadequate resourcing to deliver the transfer of services back in. Yeah, I get that. Or have sufficient resources after the transfer to deliver the services. So my interpretation of that is it's not just transferring, but it's actually doing the job once you've got it back.
Mr. Hawke?
Sorry.
Or Mr. Powell?
I think that's a fair point, Councillor. I think maybe we can clarify that, and we may even have to separate that into two slightly different risks. There's delivery of the service in the future, and there's the ability for us to facilitate the transfer back in-house. So perhaps we can readdress that and clarify it for members. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, well, I was only going to add, Chairman, that I think the likelihood is that we shall be in a position to continue the statutory services that, after all, I know we haven't wholly transferred the recycling service to curbside recycling as originally was foreseen, but everybody is getting a recycling service of some sort, and their black bins are being collected. Now, that will continue after the 3rd of October. I think the huge debate has been about the garden waste service, and last night the executive papers were published that deal with that question, and this morning a PR release was made telling the public what we intend to do about that. But I think the important thing is that the statutory services continue, and there's no indication that they shouldn't continue on the same basis as they've been being provided, without too many difficulties over the last some 9 months since the major problems with that cleared up.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, surely the biggest risk on this is staffing on the waste. What are we doing to overcome that problem?
Mr. Powell?
Yeah, it is clearly. I mean, that's part of the transferring the service back in house. So obviously, the project team will be looking closely at existing staffing numbers with FCC, what will transfer across the gaps, and how we're going to fill them. That's a key stream of the project that's underway at the moment, councillors. But it is a risk, but it's one that's been well managed at the moment.
Do we have any further questions from any councillors? Councillor Spencer.
Sorry, last one. Under the heading of cost of living pressures. This one, perhaps if anything, troubled me the most because it's the one that is kind of, we can't really see yet the full extent of where we're going to end up. I know there's no risk direction there. and I know there's a report to the executive. Sorry, I beg your pardon. There have been some announcements today, I beg your pardon, about what government may or may not do. So I was just wondering, you put down there, what are we doing? Some of that will help, I'm sure. Whether it goes anywhere near far enough is another matter. But is there anything else that we could conceivably look at or do that would help in any way, shape or form? And I'm desperate to think of anything, frankly.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. As you rightly say, a report was published to executive and will be considered next week, setting out the proposal to appoint a lead member for the council to lead on the cost of living alongside a lead officer. So we've come straight from a meeting where we were discussing our approach to cost of living. It's fair to say a lot of the work will be working with partners and coordinating a response with partners. And we are already having those conversations with organisations such as Citizens Advice and the CVS to see how we can coordinate that response. But the executive report very much sets out that we will work up a plan over the coming 4 weeks. But again, as you say, the situation is constantly evolving, and at the point of preparing the risk register, we didn't know what the support would look like from government and whether there would be a further ask on us to issue, grants to individuals. And I think it's fair to say at the moment it's not. It looks like it's going to be through the energy companies. But yes, so that will all come back to executive and be considered next week.
Mr. Powell.
Just to add one thing to that, so we're not waiting for the report to go to exec or waiting for bringing a plan forward the following month. We've got a landing page now on the website which identifies all of the support that's available, because there's a lot of stuff that the council does already. So we're trying to make the support as easily accessible as possible. We're working with the media to ensure that we're getting all the support we've got out, that the support we provide, the support the partners provide as well. So that work's ongoing, and the next plan will bring forward what else we can do on top of that, really.
Mr. Middlemass.
Yes, thank you. I just thought I'd provide some hopefully some helpful comment on the risk management that registrants on I've seen today. So obviously I attend a lot of audit committees and have done for many years, seen a lot of risk registers, and I think this risk register I think is I'd probably identify as really good practice. I mean, it's quite clear. I really like the fact that the impact categories are well spelt out in terms of financial, service quality, and so on. Similarly, the small number of risks that you're considering today, again, is good practice, because, again, I've been in other councils where they've sort of got 20 or 30 risks, and the councils really struggle to sort of focus on the important ones. And again, another aspect is the risk or history, so you can see where the risk is heading over the time. And I've seen there's been some good conversations today. I suppose I was just challenged about the opportunities bit, which often the guidance about risk management and opportunities, and I'm afraid often opportunities get missed as well. And then I suppose a couple of aspects from other councils. Firstly, climate change is typically getting hit on strategic risk registers, and I think having recently done a review of climate change, most councils are sort of very, very pessimistic about ability to meet their net zero target of whatever it is, 2030 or whatever. And then secondly, as we've talked about today, the HR risk, recruitment and retention. So recruitment as in getting people into areas such as waste recycling, but then the retention bit is losing a lot of really sort of skilled, knowledgeable, capable people who are going and inability to recruit behind them. So I just thought I'd feed that in and just to be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Middlemass. Do councillors have any other questions on this agenda item? No. Now there is in effect an amendment that's been proposed, which is the second part of the recommendation as it says on the screen. I would propose that amendment myself, Do I have a seconder for that part? Councillor Rose. And just taking the amendment initially to start off with, which is the part which is talking about increasing risk of staffing from likely to almost certain. So that's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour?
That is unanimous for the additional.
So then I believe what we do is move to the recommendation as it's on a whole. So do we have a proposer for the recommendation as a whole? Councillor Rose and seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour?
That's unanimous for the recommendation as per the screens. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to agenda item number 11, which is a verbal report. So members will not have paperwork on this, but it is estates, property and rents follow-up internal audit verbal update, which will be Wharton. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. The Estates, Property and Rents follow-up review, which was conducted during July 2021, concluded that the controls in place provided limited assurance, but an upward direction of travel with regards improvement since the original audit review in 2019-20. It was acknowledged that improvements have been made over the last 2 years, but there remained several key areas where working practices could be made significantly more effective and efficient, particularly by better use of existing software, as well as controls being strengthened in a small number of areas. The auditors therefore repeated a number of recommendations, although updated those where some improvements have begun to take place or were already planned by the head of assets. These recommendations were: 1, introduction of a planned maintenance programme for those investment properties owned by the council; 2, regular reviews to ensure that the property portfolio continues to meet corporate objectives; 3, making better use of the Concerto software to manage the investment property and estate management portfolios, removing the need for spreadsheets; 4, taking advantage of workflow systems to provide efficiencies in the management of investment and estate management properties and the collection of income; and 5, creation of a suite of reports to provide effective management information relating to the property portfolio. In terms of the planned maintenance programme, that's something that has been in place. It predates me, so it's been in place across the estate in different forms depending on where the properties sit. So in the employment and investment estate, the planned maintenance items such as gutter clearing, roller shutter door inspection and servicing, roof light cleaning, car parking grounds maintenance, etc. are inputted onto the Concerto system to be undertaken at appropriate intervals. So different things will be done at different times depending on need. So gutter clearing biannually, roller shutter doors annually, etc., etc. This forms a programme of planned maintenance to be undertaken by the property services team. So through the Concerto system, there is a programme of works that's flagged, and then the property services team pick that up and undertake those works. For our headquarter offices, depots and other service facilities, all the planned maintenance, along with statutory inspections required, so items such as fire safety checks, Legionella testing, pack testing, etc., are also inputted onto the Concerto system to be undertaken at appropriate intervals. This forms, again, a planned programme of maintenance, but in that circumstance is managed and largely undertaken by the FM team, either via existing contracts or arrangements with the property services team as appropriate. And in terms of the investment estate, the majority of properties actually in South Hams are under fully repairing and insuring leases. So that's areas that we don't need to do anything. So that's quite good. Where we have got blocks in other areas of the estate, on the investment estate, they are outsourced and managed by an outsourced company. In terms of the assets team regularly reviewing the council's assets to ensure the meeting of corporate objectives across our functions, including estates, built environment, car parks, public conveniences, offices and depots, green infrastructure and recreation. We undertake that regularly, and we talk to our portfolio lead and the leader regularly around assets and what we might be doing. We look at possible acquisitions and disposals, leases and project development and delivery. And of course, we look at opportunities. There are some opportunities around things like leasing areas of our estate for community use or commercial leases, for example. So we're looking at the moment at some sites. We leased some sites, for example, on the South Embankment recently, and that's been very successful. So we're always looking at those kind of enterprises to support local businesses, etc., on our estate. In terms of how we manage that through our systems, so systems I've mentioned, Concerto and other workflow systems. The management of our land and property assets is undertaken largely through the Concerto software system. That is supported, of course, through mapping systems and other systems, for example. I'm pretty clear with the team that spreadsheets are not an appropriate tool for managing items such as lease renewals, rent reviews, etc., and they should all be on the Concerto system. For managing property maintenance requirements, all lease events such as reviews, break clauses, or lease end dates, that's strengthened by completion memos, which are circulated by the legal team on the completion of all appropriate property transactions. So that could be commercial leases, acquisitions, disposals, and other lease events. These items are, when the completion memos are circulated, they are inputted onto the Concerto system as required. Also, other departments such as finance are included in those circulation of the completion memos and added to that circulation list, both for awareness and for inputting of billing information onto the appropriate systems. That helps us to be able to know when we need to invoice our tenants, etc., rent arrears, those kinds of things. And the systems are quite clever, and reports, if you know how to use them, but reports can be extracted as required from, for example, the Concerto system. I have one in my hand that I asked the FM team to print off for me this morning for planned programme maintenance and lease event reports, for example, rent reviews within the next 6 months, followed in house plan maintenance, etc. Additionally, finance reports are provided to us on a monthly basis to let us know who the outstanding debtors are, for example, and we review those with the finance team and as a team to make sure that we are collecting bad debts, etc., and looking at where there might be particular issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions on estates, property and rents, follow-up internal audit? Councillor Rose.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, it would be an idea if we could actually have that on screen so we'd have a chance to really see it, because, you know, you've been talking all the time, fine, but it's difficult to take it all in one foul swoop, which it sounds interesting, but it's not always easy to take it in and think, yes, straight away. Not for me anyway. I'm not speaking for everybody else, but thank you.
Certainly, I can provide that.
Councillor Taylor.
Have we got a split cost for Fullerton away from everything else? Because Fullerton seems to me a big expenditure.
Yes, we can pull out those costs, because that informs, for example, our service charges that we feed back to our tenants. But yes, we can feed that. We can provide that. I don't have them to hand, but we can provide.
Why is that, Laura?
Any further questions from any councillors? Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you for that report, Laura. Very interesting. Now I'm going to extend the metaphor a little bit from this Concerto programme that I've heard so much about over the years. It seems to me that, yes, everybody gets to writing the music because it gets up on Concerto. Sometimes it's even sort of divvied out and put on the music stands. What's less clear is whether the music is ever played, and even less clear, does the conductor actually get to hear that music when it's being played? In other words, I know it's all on the system, but I think it's much less clear as to whether the teams that are meant to be carrying out the duties actually carry them out, and even less clear as to whether somebody follows up to see whether they have been done. Now, it's not major things, because I know those get done. It's little things like cleaning roof lights, cleaning out the gutters that you mentioned. I am really doubtful that, and weeding car parks, I am really doubtful that any of those ever happen, because when I go around, it doesn't look like they've happened for years. So how do you find out whether those are being done?
Thank you. So I have direct sight of some of those. So, for example, the FM team, because I see that and I'm directly responsible. Where I'm not, so for example, the work that property services do, for example, I have regular discussions with the sort of my colleagues around whether those items are being completed. I think there is some more work to do around looking at how they're flagged and monitored through the system to make sure that things that have been inputted through Concerto are completed. So as I said, from an FM perspective, I can look at that, I can interrogate that data, and I think there is more to be done, but it is work that is being done around making sure that those elements are picked up.
Do we have any further questions? Councillor Brazil?
Yeah, just on that, I mean, obviously the reason why we asked for this report to come here, and I'm disappointed that it's a verbal report and nothing's written about it, is because of the internal audit came up with limited assurance on some of the matters involved. Can I just ask, with internal audit, I mean, are you looking at this again? What's going on there?
So general policy that when we come up with limited, we would do a follow-up, and I think we need to talk to Lisa about getting a follow-up into a plan, and it might just be a case of going through recommendations and saying, yes, have they been effectively implemented? So I think at a minimum we would look to do that for the limited reports last year, and provide assurance that yes, we're content that arrangements are in place.
And what sort of timescale are you putting on that?
Well, again, I think it's talk to Lisa and their team in terms of how long will they take. I mean, each recommendation has got a target date, so we can look at them and say, okay, you know, when should they be done? But certainly, I would expect 3 to 4 months' time to do a follow up.
Any further questions from members? So there is no recommendation or vote on this because it is a verbal report. So we will move on to agenda item number 12, which is performance management, data quality, follow-up on internal audit. And that is to be, the verbal update is to be given from Mr. Hawke.
Thank you, Chairman. So the performance management data quality audit was assessed as improvements required at its update in December 2021. Significant progress has been made since that time, and I'll walk you through the steps that we've taken. Since the audit was undertaken, we have implemented our significantly enhanced performance management framework within the organisation, very much aligned to our Better Lives for All strategy. That has resulted in a flow of performance measures through to individual staff members as well. So the first area within the audit identified as improvements required was around staff and service performance. So individual targets and objectives, all employees now have formally agreed and documented objectives which link back to our Better Lives for All strategy so that everybody can see how they contribute to our corporate priorities. With progress being managed by managers on a regular basis and objectives being documented in our new HR and payroll system. So we've got greater transparency of objectives from staff. So from the chief executive through to the various managers within the organisation, they can drill down through the layers within the organisation and see individual team members' targets and objectives. In terms of the other area that was identified as improvements required was that we hadn't reviewed our key performance indicators in some time. We have now done that. We have a revised suite of key performance indicators that are reported to executive on a quarterly basis and to overview and scrutiny twice a year. The second area within the audit identified as improvements required was around the data integrity. So we have taken steps to improve the integrity of data. I mean, this risk was very much around us extracting data from our systems, manually working through the data to arrive at our performance levels. We've now taken steps through the implementation of our new NetCall platform to ensure that that's not required. So we can actually get the data live from our NetCall system. So we are then able to audit how we've arrived at particular positions within our performance reports. We've also ensured that data used in publications is referenced. I think certainly one of the areas highlighted was in last year's annual report, where we'd included many facts and figures, but we hadn't necessarily documented where those facts and figures had come from or the time that it related to. So I think one of the figures was around number of homeless cases, and we hadn't referenced the point in time that the number of homeless cases referred to. So we've taken steps to address that. And the final area was that we didn't have an updated data quality strategy. We now have an updated data quality strategy, and we will be rolling that out to staff within the next 4 weeks.
Thank you. Do members have any questions on that? Councillor Baston.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. These procedures that every member of staff has to comply with, and they would obviously have objectives and targets with regard to those procedures. Are those integrated with the staff appraisals? Do we still do staff appraisals?
We do, Councillor Bastone. So we have an annual performance review with individual members of staff, which is an opportunity to look at their, as well as looking at backwards at their performance, also to look at their future career development opportunities and any training that will benefit them in the future. So, yep, absolutely. As well as monitoring performance, we are looking at development opportunities through those annual reviews.
Do members have any further questions on this? Mr. Middleworth.
Yes, just to make members aware that we're just completing a draft report on corporate strategy and performance management, which is looking at the the corporate strategy and but also service level performance management and so on. So we're just agreeing with the draft and the recommendations and so on. So you should see that in a month or two.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Again, it is a verbal update. There is no recommendation. So moving on to the final agenda item, which is agenda item number 13. Now, I believe we have a slight amendment. This is the last page on your 255-page report. And we are looking at a slight amendment to this, which involves the next audit committee meeting, which has currently got 4 agenda items on it. And we are looking at adding a 5th agenda item to that. Mrs. Buckle, do you have the details of what we're looking at doing there?
Chairman, I think in briefing you suggested that you would like to add a report to the next committee meeting on the 20th of October. And that was around Ivy Bridge regeneration, and to add that on to the 20th of October committee meeting day, if that was the wish of the committee.
So the recommendation, therefore, is to add an additional agenda item on to the meeting on the 20th of October, which will be a report into the Ivy Bridge Audi. I should know that. I live there. Yeah. So I'll take that as the same vote as everything else. So the recommendation is to add that agenda item on the 20th of October and approve the rest of the proposed work plan as detailed on page 255. Do any members have any questions on that or any comments they wish to make? At which point I'll just make that as a proposal myself. Do I have someone seconding? Councillor Spencer. And Councillor Spencer, yes.
Just for clarity, what is the subject matter? I know what the title is, but what aspect of it are we talking about?
Mrs. Buckle, would you like to expand on it further?
Sorry, I couldn't.
That's okay.
Meeting.
Yes. Sorry, that was the audit committee briefing. Yes. So that would be a sort of appraisal of the whole project, really. So a bit like a project completion evaluation report. So it would be all aspects of the capital project.
So at the moment we have a proposal to add that to the meeting on the 20th of October from myself. Do I have it seconded? Councillor Spencer. So we'll take it as a block vote for the proposed work plan, including that. All those in favour?
That's unanimous as recommended. Thank you, Chair.
So that's the final agenda item, 13 covered. So with no more agenda items. Councillor Brazil.
Yeah, Chair, just a couple of points, if I may. Just on that Aldi project, can we make sure that we have an up-to-date business plan, as was, if the most up-to-date business plan that there was? in respect of the Aldi, because I'd like to see that. And I think that's will make an important part of it. And the other thing, just to say that I think when we talked about our property investment strategy, and I think Lisa said around 1.5%. Our investment strategy calls for a minimum of 2% net return on our investments. Just I think we should bear that in mind when we're looking at some of, the Dartmouth investment property. That's a good example.
Thank you, Councillor Result. Mrs. Buckle, I'm sure we can get a comprehensive report, can't we, when we're looking at that agenda item?
Absolutely. And with regard to the 1.5%, within that investment strategy, it does talk about an aspirational target of 2%, but it does say that members would be prepared to accept a lower yield than that if there were additional benefits around, say, economic regeneration. So that the 2% was a sort of target yield, but it does say in the strategy about if there are additional benefits, then a lower yield than 2% may be accepted. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the final agenda item 13 that we've covered there. Being no other agenda items, I'll close the meeting at 3:36.